Been a while since we've done our last Share Friday. Quite excited to kick them off again. A bit more of a bigger internal team now. So for today's topic that I want to unpack, it is a protocol called Nouns DAO. And I'd classify it largely as an experiment that has become pretty successful. And for the topic of conversation, I'm going to assume you're familiar with the concept of a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, and what an NFT is. I'm going to share my screen and run through just a couple of different sites, a bit of like the Nouns DAO thing. And I'm going to unpack why it's quite interesting as a kind of from an NFT tokenomics perspective on how the mechanics work. And it's really quite interesting. Some people have forked it as well and tweaked the parameters slightly. And in different cases, you can see it functioning with kind of different assumptions. Awesome. So let me share my screen. Desktop. Cool. Can you guys share my screen? See my screen? Can I get a...
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Yeah, got you.
Cool. So the big distinction, what makes Nouns DAO unique, is that they've got an issuance of 1 per day. Okay. Now that seems a bit kind of different. You know, these other crypto drops like, I don't know, crypto zombies or NFT drops like crypto zombies, they issue 10,000 in one big lump sum. And, you know, the supply hits the market quite instantly. And you have kind of these different supply demand kind of metrics. Whereas Nouns DAO, what makes it really interesting is it's on a 1 noun per day issuance. So you can see the protocol has been running for about 336 days. I'll tell you why it's actually not 336 days, but effectively they issue 1 per day. And what's quite interesting, they've got a nice price discovery mechanism where people effectively bid on a daily basis to get that newly minted noun. Okay. Now, really cool. It's open source. Anyone can do with the code as they like. They've got quite a power team behind it of 10 individuals. And I really like how they kind of, it wasn't just like a side thing that just kind of, you know, slapped together. They thought it through. It's quite a cool looking, quite a cool system. Here you can see the current DAO being, current NFT being on auction, and you can see the different bidders. You can see poap.eth has the highest current bid. And I've got some cool kind of data to show, but you'll find like kind of all auctions as it gets closer to the 9 p.m. GMT plus 2 mark, it will, you'll get a bit more of a bidding war as it gets closer and closer. You can see they have a treasury of 25,000 ETH, which is approximately $45 million. So this experiment is getting kind of a proven product market fit. And so this kind of issuance mechanism is really cool, but where it really ties in is that every time an individual wins a bid and purchases that noun, those funds go into the treasury. And what happens is people that hold a Noun DAO NFT can govern those treasury funds. And this is why I say it's a little bit of kind of like an experiment, because the actual protocol isn't really focused on something too specific. It's not like they are a DAO for legal, you know, funding, or a DAO for something very specific. It's more kind of open-ended, and it's created this community. And the slow trickle, this 1 per day, has created really interesting dynamics. And naturally it has to be matched by a certain level of demand in order to kind of function in a healthy system. All right. So you can check out the site nouns.wtf. They break down things a little bit. And why I say it's not necessarily 1 per day is because there's actually every 10th DAO, every 10th noun gets issued to the creators of the project for the first 5 years, okay? But that does not interrupt with the auction mechanism. So in actual fact, how I understood it, there are 11 nouns per 10 days, if that makes sense. So every 10 days, there'll be one extra minute, but it doesn't interfere with the auction mechanism. And as such, I think it's just one extra being issued for the first 5 years. And that's how the kind of developers of the project make some funds. Since a noun goes for about 100 ETH, or current price of ETH about $200,000, every 10 days they are doing pretty okay, I would say. But cool, let's dive into something. So that's kind of the basic high level unpack. Yeah.
So just to understand maybe the structure, there's a treasury, so the funds when people buy nouns go into like the DAO treasury,
Correct.
but the noun, every 10th noun, that doesn't go to the treasury, that goes to like a group of developers that are like hard coded or
Exactly. So they get
okay.
every 10th noun. And there's some cool kind of generative art stuff happening in the background where they kind of work with a seed, and each noun is unique. So each noun is kind of generated on chain, supposedly. What's something to note, which is quite interesting in relation to other NFT projects, is that each noun, although it has its own characteristics and it's got kind of different, like looks different, they are entirely supposedly valued the same. So they don't have this rarity distribution type thing of each noun has some kind of rarity factor that makes it more rare. In fact, they actually say, because it's random, that some of them that have more similar characteristics are supposedly more rare, because the chances that are happening are quite unlikely. And then naturally, I think the nouns that go with, like, you know, the first 1 to 10 are perceived as higher, likewise with noun 69, etc. And you can flip through it and you can check out the previous nouns as they've kind of gone out, and you can see the current bid, or the winning bid, and who is that. Something very fascinating that I found looking through this yesterday and last night, this winning bid is not in fact the floor price. So I don't know if there's maybe an arbitrage opportunity here or something of sorts, but this individual that won the bid yesterday, they paid 143 ETH. And if I go over to OpenSea and check out the project, you can see that there are actually some nouns being sold for less. So quite interesting. Maybe there's something, you know, that they see additional value in, that they mint it through the auction. Maybe it's just auction dynamics that make the mint a bit higher, but they paid more, or maybe they just really like the look of this one. I think this one's quite cool. It looks like a crocodile with a top hat. Another light note, these glasses are very kind of pivotal in the entire kind of nouns community. You can see each nouns NFT has one. And so, like, that's kind of like the loose tie to this community. Now, they have a big treasury of approximately $45 million. Okay, what are they doing with this treasury? You can see they hold some other tokens. Some of their proposals around, you know, restructuring their treasury to store, you know, assets in different forms, you know, staked ETH, for example. Cool. Fantastic article. I will share into it, which goes down into some of the deeper things. Naturally, so they mentioned Shark DAO here, which is quite interesting. Naturally, in order to own one of these NFTs, it's notably expensive, or kind of exclusionary. So it's not always that accessible. And we've come to this really interesting kind of field now where there's been DAOs created in order to pool funds together to purchase a noun. And then that DAO will govern and make votes with that noun. So you've got a DAOs governing a DAO, which is really quite interesting. It just makes it a bit more accessible. All right, here's the treasury. You can see, you can verify what funds they have. Fantastic article. Love to go through. I suggest going through, but I'm not going to read everything verbatim. They've got a Notion site where they talk about the different things. They share the GitHub. And one of the things I really like, or something that kind of gave me more perspective into the project, is the projects tab. And it goes through all of the different kind of projects that are around nouns. And some of these have been effectively been proposed, and they kind of get approved, and these different projects get kind of developed. Now, the proposal structure, it's built on top of compound governance, but you know, essentially, to highlight just the kind of proposal form, you have to own a noun to create a proposal. And when you create a proposal, people will vote with their specific nouns. Cool. Here you can see a bunch of proposals that have come through, and I won't dive into each one of them, but I will kind of chat about some of the interest. I mean, I didn't read them all myself, but I'll chat about, like, you know, some of the interesting ones. For example, they increased the treasury to, you know, 20% of their funds into staked ETH. So you can see here. And what's quite interesting about this one, I think, specifically, is you had a case where, you know, it was quite a bit uncertain. Like, there were quite a few people against, people abstained from voting, so they decided not to vote, and quite a few decided for. And you can see the exact kind of specifics of what that transaction would look like, and you can see the proposer, etc. All right. So that's maybe very logical in terms of, like, you know, what you're doing with treasury funds. But some of the other ones I think are interesting is, like, kind of early on, they wanted to create an app. So they essentially submitted this whole kind of breakdown of a Nouns app. Again, you know, not really focused on anything too specific, but they put this proposal together, and they've got they got approved with obviously some funding for the developments and stuff. And you can see 16 people voted for it, which is quite cool. Naturally, this was fairly early on, so probably less nouns in circulation to vote. But what's quite fascinating, obviously, you're incentivized to because you've kind of put your funds into the treasury when you purchase a noun, to kind of govern those funds as well, which again ties into some interesting dynamics. Anyway, just to touch on some of the cool looking projects, or some of the random stuff, like, you know, they've got like these Instagram AR filters where you can put the nouns glasses over your eyes, and they've got all these different projects. We're not going to dive into each one of them, but I will kind of touch on some of them. Let me just move my thing here. Okay. So another cool kind of random thing that they were doing. I don't know if anyone can recognize that font. I thought that was quite interesting. Cool. Here's some analytics I want to dive into, but before we do that, here's another kind of arbitrary kind of proposal. Someone put a proposal together from Hong Kong saying they wanted to put a nouns, one of the nouns big in fabric on a sailing boat, and sail across the harbor with other Nouns DAO holders in Hong Kong. So they got this proposal approved, and this is still kind of the proposal in action. This is when it was originally proposed. They wanted to do something like this. And it was just to kind of tie into the community and get some exposure around the project. So you can see this is on April 11th, and they've made some progress. They've got this kind of prep, but I don't think they've actually set sail yet. I didn't kind of capture that from looking. Cool. GitHub, again, all the code, open source, really cool. They support people kind of using it. You can see here that some of the governance modules and stuff are based on compounds. I'm not going to dive into the nitty gritty of the code, but that's accessible from the Notion page as well. Then some non-analytics, or analytics, non-analytics. I'm not going to dive through all of this. I just want to share the two kind of graphs that I thought were quite interesting. They've got a mapping here of the different auctions. So each individual auctions over time, and this is a log scale on the bottom, but if it's kind of just showing like this increase in bid amount as it gets closer and closer to the close of auction time. And this is quite interesting as well. You can see the for a specific day or for a specific noun, you can see the auction. And as to what I was saying earlier, you can see that it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, skips 10, because that goes to the core team, into 11. And you can see the different, so for example, this one, looks like there's only 2 bids, maybe still kind of early on in the project that they didn't have too much like market and traction. But as you get a bit further down, you can see kind of more bids going into the space.
What was their cheapest noun? Like, yeah. If we wanted to get in, like.
If we wanted to get in, I suggest we set up a sub DAO to to pull some funds together, because frankly it's a bit saucy for my lifestyle. But here's quite a nice graph of the winning bid amounts, and you can see, I think when the project kind of kicked off, you have this very classic kind of little bit extra hype kind of bubble. You get this kind of little bit of a bubble type thing at the beginning, like, oh wow, this is so cool. Keep in mind this bar here at the beginning is actually at 600 ETH. So that was the day one noun. And then over time, kind of it leveled out a bit. And I think it's really cool now to kind of see that it's naturally kind of progressing up as it's getting a little bit more, let's say, traction in the space, a little bit more like, you know, it's getting more well known. And it's like this, it's this true cool thing. It's not just this mad experiment with crazy Ponzi mechanics and, you know, sometimes what can be perceived in the space. Okay, that's kind of the high level going into it. I have a little bit more to chat about. This is an example of the app. Here's a conversation about how can you afford a noun, and then they segue into talking about Shark DAO, which is essentially a community that have pooled funds together as a DAO to purchase a noun. Another interesting kind of case, and it's supported by Nouns DAO, is Little Noun. Okay, so here, same mechanism, different parameters. Okay, so this is clearly a fork. And what I find quite interesting about this is they've tweaked the parameters, but they've created an entirely different ecosystem. Okay, so instead of having one per day, it's one every 15 minutes. Okay, that makes it a little less exclusionary. So, you know, there's more being issued, which means more people can get involved. Naturally, because there's a lot more of an issuance, the price is not so, there's not such a heavy like kind of bidding for the price. You can see they still have a, you know, quite a substantial treasury of 1,000 ETH. It's not quite the 25,000, but, you know, it's definitely getting some interest and traction. And, you know, pretty much for quite similar, lot like going on the same thing. Really interesting to see completely different dynamics. I think while we're on this page now, someone just made a bid, or that just kind of loaded in, for example. But these are going for considerably cheaper. When I say considerably cheaper, I think it's still around $300 or $600, if I'm not mistaken, between $600 and $1,000. They're kind of selling for every 15 minutes. I think that every 15 minutes thing creates completely different, you know, parameters. And if I was to look at it, I would say, you know, this is awesome, I can get involved. It's much more kind of affordable. But if I had to look at it and say every 15 minutes, all of a sudden I might be more, I'm not going to be, you know, as active as looking at all these proposals. And I might think someone can just kind of come along and, you know, spend the day maybe bidding and collect a larger pool of nouns, and makes it a little bit less or a bit more exposed to somewhat of kind of a 51% attack. Let's say, like, you know, it doesn't even have to be a 51% attack, I suppose, if you have voters not voting. So also really interesting kind of dynamics. And then what is this one called now? No Name DAO. Another fork of Nouns DAO. I thought this was really cool. You can see it still got, this is kind of the older version of the site, so it's a previous fork. And it is a fork on Polygon, much more accessible. I actually like the art. I think it's quite cool, but it is kind of hasn't worked. So originally they had a price floor, which meant that you had to bid over like 100 Matic or something, about $100 to purchase one or to make a bid. And it had maybe for the first 10 days interaction. They didn't have the audience or demand enough for a daily issuance. Okay, so this is maybe some supply demand kind of dynamics, but effectively, because they didn't have enough demand, a lot of days nobody was bidding. People weren't bidding for the thing. So the system kind of collapsed. It needs to have kind of effectively a minimum daily demand of price. So then this kind of system, they had this floor price, and so nobody was bidding. And so what they did is they removed the floor price in order for people to kind of interact. And when they removed the floor price, naturally it stung some of the early users because they had paid, you know, $100 plus. And then after that, you know, you could bid much less. But removing the floor price creates that kind of price efficiency and fairness. And so kind of interesting to see the same case study, just without, you know, nailing in completely on the kind of demand side. Still, you know, it's kind of interesting. There's about 2,000 Matic sitting in here, which I think its current price is about $1,600. So if you were to potentially buy up all the, you bid one Matic a day, and you get all the kind of no names. You could govern those treasury funds. Now, likewise with Nouns DAO, there is a veto function. So they've got a kind of veto right as the developers, just to ensure that some of these kind of attacks don't occur later on. They have promoted the fact that they're going to remove this at some point, but they still kind of have that in place. Okay, I've been talking for a really long time. If you want to read a little bit more, check out these, this is their discourse. It's not actually proposal, it's just people chatting, and it doesn't have to be Nouns DAO holders. Some cool things. Check out their projects. They've got lots of different things on the go. Some of it quite cool, some of it quite random, some of it, with partnerships in other communities, and really cool to see some of these things. Another fascinating thing, and I'm just going to touch on it really quickly. They funded 100 ETH for the Ukraine crisis, or the war in Ukraine. Over here, somewhere 100 ETH for emergency humanitarian assistance with Ukraine through UNICEF. And then you can see here, they issued another one, which this one is actually not voted for. So this is through Rescue Toads project, but you can see quite a few people were against and some were for. So I don't know what the discussions are happening in the background, but really kind of interesting to see the different governance decisions happening. Last thing, you can check out the Nouns OpenSea page. This one noun every day forever, I still think is it's accurate, but there's also that that extra supply of through governance. And yeah, that pretty much sums up my exploration into Nouns DAO. Questions? Anyone have thoughts around it or want to chat some more?
Yeah, I definitely think it's super interesting. But with the proposals, I guess you have to own a noun to create a proposal.
Correct. So you have to hold one noun, which again, I think creates interesting dynamics over time because, maybe, I think the issuance is slow enough, but maybe at some point you want someone to have to hold more than one. Otherwise, you're just getting too many proposals thrown out. This is probably like 5 years on the down line when there's, a couple thousand in existence. But again, through governance, they can propose these changes. It's
pretty interesting how, I guess it really is like an emergent DAO, at least how I see it. Like, cool, the nouns are pretty, and like I do like the art. It's cool that they auto-generated, but really it's the emergence of what the DAO does that's interesting more than the NFT.
True. I think it's why I tied it as an experiment, because I don't think they have like a specific focus. But this would be a fantastic model to kind of apply to other communities and to really like build, this staggered. So one thing that's maybe interesting, where it's good and it works well with kind of just this pot of financial value for like, doing stuff with the funds, is that it's a bit exclusionary. But for some cases, you might not want to be preventing people from, joining the DAO. Maybe that's where these kind of micro DAO structures create a bit more sense, where you've got a DAO like Shark DAO that holds a noun and governs through that. But you do kind of make it a bit exclusionary. Some people would like to participate or be involved, but there's only one issuance per day.
Yeah, super interesting. I kind of feel like maybe if wildcards had done this back in the day, who knows? I also guess it depends on the people in the DAO, really. So if everyone in the DAO is, wanting to help Ukraine, there'll be lots of proposals around that, and it'll be kind of an emergent thing. And the people who don't like Ukraine or whatever, they would just leave the DAO, sell their tokens, just going on that example. And then that DAO sort of like forms a direction. So I think in some ways, the more of these sort of DAOs that form and then like slowly build an identity, the better.
Fantastic. You raise a really good point. So what happens when you want to target it to a specific audience? And this is where kind of what I was thinking and framing it around is you actually do an initial mint. So you essentially supply that to some form of kind of verified identity. So, this community, for example, let's take a look at Poolies, the legal funding. I think, what could be, obviously it's a bit tweaking to what they've currently set up, but once the whole fundraising thing's finished and the trial is over, they're likely going to be sitting on some additional funds, and they should take that, put it into treasury, assign all the current Poolie NFT holders governance position, and then do this daily issuance, and that would become kind of a legal DAO. And you've already targeted the audience who wants kind of this they support like regulation and DeFi and that's kind of the ethos behind them. And then you have this kind of DAO structure that goes into continuity, which now you've kind of set up the structure that this is the focus of the DAO, and post that, otherwise you can't just have people financially bidding and then they're just controlling the funds. But again, all experimental and quite interesting.
Yeah, and then I like how with NFTs you can have the sort of DAO of DAOs. It'll be really interesting to see how that DAO that bought a noun does.
Yeah, I think they actually have 2 nouns by now, so this is quite interesting to see what they're doing with the funds and how all these governance structures get set up.
And it's also interesting seeing the sort of participation. I don't know if there's statistics around that. It seems like the participation is really good. There's only 300 something nouns, and the votes seem to have, I don't know, 20 votes on them normally.
Yeah, so I think there's not crazy amount of proposals, and when you're putting in $200,000, you probably are open to looking once every few days to see proposals. So that's quite nice in that kind of financial dynamic and the playoffs in these kind of parameters. What's also quite a cool thing to check out, and I forgot to share it, is there's a little nouns June analytics page. And again, I think little nouns, awesome, completely different dynamics because they tweak the parameters. Every 15 minutes is a new noun. But yeah, you can check some more kind of data around that. And I suppose, with these different issuances, it'll be quite interesting to model like, different behaviors based on these different parameters. And you've got, I think, maybe 2 relative extremes, which is quite cool. Cool. We are hitting about 30 minutes and happy to wrap things up here. Last call for any final questions before we wrap things up.
I'm kind of wondering, like how does something get from idea to this massive where it's like worth that much money? And because the first one was so big, then there must have been like a lot of hype before mint. So I don't know if you like like how did they do that? How did they get that level of hype? And was it like like our strategy with the morganing is like partnerships with other protocols? I'm kind of assuming this is just driven by like whales hyping it up.
So great question, and there's the dark side of marketing in an auction like this too. So how do you prevent like it? So maybe it's just something that makes it challenging at launch, but I think organically now it's kind of gotten to supply demand type.
There must have been someone rich at the beginning because they paid 600 ETH for the first one, and then that raises eyebrows. Like
exactly, and who's to say it wasn't kind of
insider?
Yeah.
Money can pay for marketing, I guess.
Yeah, but so it's gotten past
attention
now where it's really interesting, and it has the treasury funds. So what you're actually buying into is you buying into governance over these funds. So it's not so speculative now. It's more maybe quantifiable to a degree.
What's also interesting is the DAO is issuing these NFTs for free, and the money goes back into the treasury. So if there was ever a dry period where people stopped caring about Nouns DAO, there could be proposals to buy back their own nouns. So like for that 15-minute one, there might actually become a time when like issuing one every 15 minutes is too much. And the treasury can buy it back basically for free and keep some nouns.
So interesting question, and I suppose it's looking for more long term. But currently how it works is if nobody makes a bid during that duration period, for example, nouns a day, it doesn't get minted. There's no noun. So it just kind of bypasses. that's kind of the example that Polygon fork, which didn't really take off, didn't have the kind of needed demand. Alrighty, and on that note, thanks guys so much. Looking forward to the next Share Friday, and hope that was interesting. And enjoy the rest of your Friday.
Cool. Cheers, guys. That's really cool. Ciao.